warm welcome to the year-end special edition of World 360. I'm Akanksha Swaroop. This year, Donald Trump's return to the White House has reshaped America's global leadership, one that shattered multiple precedents, marking his second non-consecutive term as uniquely disruptive. He was elected after 2 impeachments, a felony conviction, and sworn indoors amid brutal cold. Soon after, he unleashed an unprecedented executive order barrage in his first 100 days. Trump also entered office as the oldest president ever at inauguration. And a Musk-backed Doge initiative further blurred lines between government and private tech. All of it redefining modern presidencies. But more importantly, he unleashed a global trade war, using tariffs as a key foreign policy tool in 2025. This, as US President Donald Trump has used tariffs as a key foreign policy tool for this year, all of it signaling Washington's retreat from its traditional role as the world's global policeman. Whether it is about his peace efforts in Gaza or the sharp breakaway from Biden's policy on Ukraine, Trump grabbed international headlines even more so with the Trump-Zelensky spat in the White House. While the US president has adopted a hard stance on Venezuela, escalating pressure through sanctions and maritime operations, he has followed a more nuanced path with China. This by lowering the anti-Beijing rhetoric but amping up the tariff-based pressure. Remember, during his election campaign for his second term, Trump had pledged to end Moscow-Kiev war within days. But the armed conflict has neared its 4th year, with prospects for a comprehensive peace settlement still uncertain. The tone-deaf approach of the Trump administration on instability in South Asia, or his false claims on mediating between India and Pakistan, much of it was a sharp U-turn from the Biden-era policies. Interestingly, Trump broke his own record of lowest approval rating at the end of first year. So has 2025 really been the year of Donald Trump? So was 2025 a time of upheaval or calm for geopolitics? Did Donald Trump's second term lead to a roller coaster ride for the world? Several wars, skirmishes and clashes that Donald Trump claims he has mediated and even ended for 2025. He may have missed the Nobel Peace Prize, but wanted to lay claim to the Global Peacemaker Award for 2025, if any. Here's a report.
We saved millions and millions of lives. The Congo is an example, over 10 million people killed, and it was heading for another 10 million very quickly. And it just, the fact that we could do that, India, Pakistan, so many different wars that we're able to end, in some cases a little bit before they started, just right before they started. It was going to be late.
Donald Trump's return to the White House in 2025 came with a very familiar pitch. He once again called himself the world's ultimate deal maker. According to Trump, he ended 8 wars in under a year. The problem? Most of them were not wars, were not ended, or were not his.
And I called Prime Minister Modi. I said, we can't make a trade deal with you. No, we must make a trade deal. I said, no, we can't. You're starting a war with Pakistan. We're not going to do it. And then I called Pakistan. I said, we're not going to do trade with you because you're fighting with India.
Starting with India-Pakistan, Trump claimed trade threats forced peace after India's Operation Sindoor. Fact check, New Delhi flatly rejected any US mediation, making it clear the ceasefire was strictly bilateral and handled directly between the two sides.
We ended the war in Gaza and really, on a much bigger basis, created peace. And I think it's going to be a lasting peace, hopefully an everlasting peace. Peace in the Middle East. We secured the release of all of the remaining hostages.
Moving to Israel and Hamas, Trump touted what he called a deal. Fact check, fighting never stopped, temporary pauses are not peace, and no agreement carries Trump's signature or US guarantees.
But I think we've made a lot of progress with respect to Russia and Ukraine. I hope. Last month it was close to 27,000 soldiers were killed, mostly soldiers, but 27,000 people, but mostly soldiers were killed last month in Russia versus Ukraine.
Time limit on security guarantees?
Well, there's no time limit. The time limit is whenever we get it done. We're going to try to get it done.
Moving to Russia-Ukraine now, Trump said he calmed things down. Fact check, The war continued through 2025 with no ceasefire, no settlement, and no talks brokered by Washington. Speaking of Armenia and Azerbaijan, Trump called a US mediation deal the end of the war. Fact check. Leaders did sign a peace agreement, but core issues like borders and security guarantees remain unresolved. Lasting peace is still unproven. Speaking of Egypt and Ethiopia, Trump says he stopped a war over the Nile Dam dispute. Fact check. There was diplomatic tension, not an act of war. Talks over the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam continue with no clear peace outcome yet. Rwanda, DR Congo, Trump suggested he helped cool tensions. Fact check. A Washington brokered agreement was signed, but fighting in eastern Congo and rebel activity continue. Stability remains elusive.
With Thailand and Cambodia, two people I get along with great, and I dealt with them and I called them and I said, look, fellas, you got to relax, you got to take it easy. They lost. They started the war again and I got it ended.
Thailand and Cambodia, Trump said he brokered a ceasefire and ended the war. Fact check. The ceasefire was short-lived, clashes resumed as long-standing border disputes remain unresolved. And lastly, we have Serbia and Kosovo. Trump counts this as one of the 8 wars ended. Fact check. No active war was underway in 2025. Any peace talks trace back to earlier agreements and the US was not the decisive broker. And then there were the trade wars. Trump imposed tariffs on allies and adversaries alike, insisting economic pressure was his new peace tool. India, Europe and others pushed back, drawing a clear line between trade disputes and actual conflict resolution. Therefore, in 2025, Trump sold himself as a global peacemaker. But beyond the speeches, wars largely continued, diplomacy stayed multilateral, and many of Trump's claimed victories existed more on the podium than on the ground.
Was it really the year of Donald Trump? Let's quickly deep dive, and for that let me introduce my esteemed guests today. I'm joined in by Professor Brahma Chelani, who's a leading strategic affairs expert, also joined in by Mr. Raymond Vickery, who's an author and advisor on US-India relations and former US Assistant Secretary of Commerce, Trade Development as well. And I'm also joined in by Daniel Lacalle, who's an author and economist. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining in. Professor Chelani, for a man who promised to end the war between Russia and Ukraine in just a matter of days, how do you view the trajectory of this of the peace talks that are currently shaping up? Also, not to forget the claims that he's made of mediating 8 wars so far.
I think what stands out about Trump's second term is the excessive personalization of foreign policy. Far from being the deft strategist that he claims to be, Trump has turned American diplomacy into a one-man reality show. Trump's foreign policy is anything but a coherent strategy. If there's one element in his foreign policy that sticks out, is the fact that he has subordinated long-term strategy to short-term economic extraction. His focus on economic extraction is apparent from the way he has wielded tariffs and trade coercion as instruments even against allies. Even in relation to Gaza and the Ukraine war, Trump has sought economic advantage for the US or for his fast-growing family business empire. He has looked at Gaza through the prism of a real estate developer who could rake in major profits. And in seeking to end the Ukraine war, he's eyeing the more than $300 billion in Russian central bank assets that have been frozen in the West. In fact, his special envoy is negotiating with Moscow to use those assets for Ukraine's reconstruction and for joint US-Russian projects. In other words, the money invested will be Russian, but the profits will be shared equally between Russia and the US. So his entire focus is on economic extraction. But I think globally, he has turned disruption into his doctrine.
Okay.
The world was already on edge before he assumed office in January, but he has made the world even more turbulent.
All right. Raymond Vickery, when the national security plan was being unveiled by Washington under Donald Trump 2.0, they said that US it's going to largely step back from its role as a policeman of the global order, as they phrased it, showing restraint. Has this been a pragmatic and principled approach, and how much of that restraint do you see yourself?
Well, thanks very much for having me, and happy holidays and happy New Year to you and viewers. You know, in order to wage peace and prosperity, just like you would wage war, you have to have a strategy, you have to have partners, and you have to have principles. Unfortunately, President Trump has none of these. His is, Professor Chilani has said, is a transactional approach. It's a real estate developer's approach. What's in it for me on this transaction, regardless of what the relationship is? What has happened is, of course, he has fulfilled his promise about America First, which was a throwback really to the early 20th century, when there were people in the United States who did not want to oppose the Nazis, did not want a world role for the United States. And what he's done is go back to the 19th century in trying to set up a Western Hemisphere hegemon approach to building his area of authority, which would make him a great man.
Right.
You have very much capsulized what his real drive is in terms of being a peacemaker, and it's self-aggrandizement for himself, get a Nobel Peace Prize. So it's a very unfortunate development, but it requires great democracies like India and the US to take a saner approach to mutual concerns. Both India and the U.S. At heart have same values, same principles in many
I'm
areas.
going to get into that aspect just in a few minutes, but I also want to bring in Daniel on that note. Daniel, what do you make of this shift in Donald Trump's foreign policy, or rather the shift in US foreign policy under Donald Trump, and also the claims of the war mediations, given that we still see violence breaking out in those very conflict-prone zones that he claims to have mediated?
I think that foreign policy in general is about deal making. No? If you think about it, obviously that is very, very challenging because it takes quite a bit of time. But I think that what we have seen in the Middle East, what we have seen in Ukraine, is an interest in achieving agreements and deals that end these conflicts. The foreign policy in general is about showing that it is the United States that leads those negotiations, not different states. And I think that that is the big difference compared with other administrations. Obviously, it's only been a year of Donald Trump's presidency, but in general, what I think is very evident is that the change of foreign policy is about putting the United States at the forefront of every decision making and looking at the possibility of reaching very quick and important deals. Whether that will play out in a successful way, we will have to see in the future.
I want to quickly bring in Professor Chilani on that note. Professor Chilani, let's also talk about how he has, in fact, reached out to key regional actors. On one hand, he's hardened his stance on Venezuela, where we are seeing sanctions being imposed, also a looming fear of a military conflict. At the same time, how he's engaged with Syria, lifting sanctions and hosting the Syrian President Ahmad al-Shara for talks at the White House. What's your assessment?
Akansha, it's very difficult to analyze Trump's foreign policy logically because there's no logic driving his foreign policy. For example, he has crowned himself a global peacemaker. But as your own story pointed out, that some of the 8 wars that he claims to have ended, some of those wars never existed, others remain unresolved. And in one case, Trump actually joined the fight, escalating the conflict to a new level. That was the Israel-Iran war, when he intervened and bombed Iran. And the other element which is very troubling and which actually undermines America's soft power, because America, its real strength was soft power. But Trump is unraveling that soft power by playing the race and religion cards. The way his policies and actions are deeply infused with racial and religious overtones is very disturbing. It undermines America's soft power. Like, for example, yesterday, on Christmas Day, he ordered the bombing of alleged ISIS sites in Nigeria on grounds of protecting Christians. Now, he's playing the religious card openly and bombing a sovereign country, even though he forced Nigeria to give consent to the bombing campaign. Yet, when you play the race card and the religion card,
Right.
you basically undermine your moral standing as a nation. And I think there is a long-term concern about the direction in which he has taken the U.S. so far.
All right. Stay with me, gentlemen. In fact, hold on to your thoughts, because let's also talk about the role that tariffs have played. Because remember, this is one war that has shaken the entire globe and its economy. In fact, 2025 marked the full return of Donald Trump's tariff-first diplomacy. This as the trade once again weaponized against allies and adversaries alike. China remained Trump's primary target, with fresh tariffs slapped on Chinese technology, electric vehicles and strategic manufacturing sectors, reigniting a trade war that had never fully ended. India too found itself in Trump's tariff crosshairs. Washington imposed punitive duties, accusing New Delhi of purchasing discounted Russian oil and indirectly financing Moscow's war in Ukraine. So Trump argued the energy trade undercut Western sanctions and prolonged the entire conflict. India pushed back firmly. The Ministry of External Affairs has rejected the allegations that India's energy purchases were driven by national interests, global market conditions, and even energy security. New Delhi, in fact, has pointed out that several Western countries continue trade with Russia in other forms. Let's try and now get you a 360 view of how this has impacted the globe. But before that, listen in.
Well, we're negotiating right now, and it's also BRICS. You know, they have BRICS, which is basically a group of countries that are anti the United States, and India is a member of that, if you can believe it. It's an attack on the dollar, and we're not going to let anybody attack the dollar. So it's partially BRICS, and it's partially the trade, this trade situation. It's the deficit. We had a tremendous deficit. So, as you know, Prime Minister Modi is a friend of mine, but they don't do very much business in terms of business with us. They sell a lot to us, but we don't buy from them. You know why? Because the tariff is so high. They have one of the highest tariffs in the world. Now, they're willing to cut it very substantially, but we'll see what happens. We're talking to India now. We'll see what happens. It doesn't matter too much whether we have a deal or whether we charge them a certain tariff, but you'll know at the end of this week.
All right, let's quickly go across to our guests who continue to stay with us. Mr. Vikri, interestingly, what we are also being made aware of is that Donald Trump is currently confronted with the lowest popularity ratings at the end of the first year of the second term, especially when it's compared to his previous tenure. Do you think that tariffs have had a role, and have they sort of impacted his entire foreign policy as adversely?
Well, I think there's no question that the tariff approach has been detrimental not only to building world peace and prosperity, but has had a reaction here at home. You know, there were two chief points in Donald Trump's campaign for the presidency. One was immigration, and the other was the lowering of inflation. And the tariffs have had exactly the opposite effect. Now, they haven't had the immediate disastrous effect that some had predicted because he's backed off time and time again from his extreme positions. But make no mistake about it, if there is any one action which should deny him the Nobel Peace Prize, it is the tariff approach.
All right.
Because tariffs and security are joined at the hip, and you cannot distrust allies, you can't drive them away. You can't have a Fortress America economic policy and expect to build world peace and prosperity.
All right.
So this,
I want to quickly bring in Professor Chilani on that note. As far as India is concerned, Professor Chilani, do you believe that he weaponized India's oil trade with Russia? At the same time, there is still no first tranche of the BTA. Do you see that it is as optimistic as India is claiming? Is there finally going to be any light at the end of this tunnel?
Trump has used India's Russian oil purchases as a pretext to impose these high tariffs. India today faces higher US tariffs than China. That's an extraordinary outcome for a country that Washington routinely describes as a key counterweight to China. The world's largest buyer of Russian oil and gas is China, which has not faced any secondary sanctions from Washington, nor has the European Union, which has spent far more buying Russian energy than India since the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So selectively targeting India was by design. He's now looking at India not as a strategic partner, but as a trade rival that needs to be squeezed. There is a fundamental shift in the US approach toward India under Donald Trump. India still has to come to terms with the changed realities. But globally, Trump has used his sweeping global tariffs as an economic tool and a political cudgel. He has fashioned tariffs as the utility knife of his second-term agenda. This may have helped him to raise revenue, but this has come at the cost of America's relationships with close partners, close allies, whether in Europe, whether in East Asia,
right,
or even in Southeast Asia. Those relationships have suffered. Trust has been undermined between the US and its allies and partners. And
sorry
that's a
to
real
interrupt
cost to
you
pay.
there, Professor. Running short of time, quickly want to bring in Daniel on the note of, say, H-1B visa policies as well, because remember, that's the other weapon that he's used. So, Daniel, are Americans really going to benefit from the current policy revision as far as H-1B visas are concerned? Because as far as Americans are concerned, they still require Indian and Chinese labor because that is the skilled labor which the US currently lacks.
Well, I think that obviously, as you rightly state, India and China are going to continue to be global leaders of economic growth and fantastic economies that are getting very strong improvements in technology, in exports, in manufacturing, industry, energy, etc. So I don't think that the United States is looking to diminish the growth of China and India at all. I think that what the United States is trying to do is to not get the United States behind that trend of economic growth, industrial development, and improvement in the energy and technology sector.
I want to quickly bring in Raymond Vickery since I'm running short of time. Raymond Vickery, as far as instability plaguing South Asia is concerned, as we speak, there are tensions plaguing Bangladesh. We've already witnessed what's happened in Nepal. You're looking at India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan. What's your assessment of the Trump administration's tone-deaf approach as far as this instability is concerned? Is this going to cost the world? And also, is this a sharp breakaway from Biden-era policies?
Well, it certainly is a sharp breakaway. You know, it goes back to the whole question of how you view foreign policy. You can't view South Asia as a transactional area. You can't favor the most authoritarian of the governments in Pakistan and expect to build peace and stability over a long period of time. Unfortunately, there are those, the generals in Pakistan, who understand that if you flatter President Trump, if you play to his ego, if you say he's deserving of the Nobel Prize, then he favors you. This is a completely contrary approach to the Biden era, and it will not bear fruit in stability in South Asia or anywhere else in the world.
All right, Professor Chilani, quick closing thoughts on the U.S. President's claims on mediating between India and Pakistan post-Operation Sindoor. How has U.S. treated a key strategic ally, one that it partners with in Quad, and is playing a significant role in the overall, say, security of the Indo-Pacific?
Akansha, the very fact that the Quad is dying is a testament to how Trump has turned disruption into his governing creed. As far as South Asia is concerned, look at the contradiction in his policy. His administration is propping up military-linked governments in Pakistan and Bangladesh while pursuing a regime change strategy in military-ruled Myanmar. So the military in Myanmar needs to be removed from power while the regimes in Dhaka and Islamabad, which are de facto military regimes, can stay on with US support. In other words, the American foreign policy is making India's neighborhood more combustible, with its spillover effects on India's security.
Right.
You don't expect a close partner to be undermining your security. So what stands out is that despite the talk of US-India convergence at the global level, in India's own neighborhood, US policy is working against India's vital interests.
Thank you for putting that into perspective for us, Professor Chilani. Many thanks to you, Daniel Lekel, as well as Mr. Vickery, for joining in on this special year-end edition of World 360. And that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for watching.